All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Anthony Cruciandero, CDU Watershed Coordinator for the South Boise. Thank you all for coming. We're going to start with a nice round of introductions and make sure that some of the new faces get to know everybody else. But I'm going to start by kind of orienting us a little bit with watershed boundaries itself. So we are looking at collaborative process going on with this group between Anderson Ranch and Arrow Rock reservoirs, including all the tributaries that go in there. So to zoom in on that a little bit, it is the South Fork Boise Watershed Collaborative, but we are focusing on this section of the South Fork Boise that is below Anderson Ranch Dam. So that is our main area of concern. This watershed group was put together with funding from Bureau of Reclamation as part of a Phase 1 grant. That gives you the option for extending, and we have put in that application, so hopefully this will have funding through 2028. We will see if that comes through. And then there is also if we have this group already going, there are many programs through the same WaterSmart umbrella from Reclamation where we can get usually 75% cost share for implementing any of the projects that we come up with. So that is what we are in general terms, but as far as introductions go, let's kind of go around and give your name if you're representing any organization or if it's just yourself, and then your general relationship to the South Fork Boise. So I am, again, Anthony Cruciandero. I am the South Fork Boise Watershed Coordinator hired through Trout Unlimited, but really just representing the watershed group for a major portion of my position. And it's not a Trout Unlimited group, it is just where the funding came in from Reclamation to put all this stuff together. So you're all important parts of that. Andy, do you want to start and we'll work our way around the room?
Sure. Andy Brunel, I'm with the Ted Trueblood chapter of Trout Unlimited, and I've fished the South Fork of the Boise for many years.
I'm Joe Maloney. I live in Elmore County. I fished the South Fork of the Boise for probably 50 years. I'm a local guide, but obviously we don't guide on the South Fork. I just have a local affinity for that river, and it's my home water, so it's where I hang out.
John Walter, I own one of the fly shops in Boise, and advocate of the South Fork.
My name is Daniel Ritz. I do communications for the Idaho Wildlife Federation, along with Anthony, co-leading the Education Outreach and Signage Committee. Personally, I'm an angler, so my interests lie in South Fork for that. Professionally, interdisciplinary sportsman interests across the watershed.
Ann Moser, I'm a wildlife habitat biologist for Fish and Game. So most of my experience is on upland restoration.
I'm Art Butts. I'm with Idaho Fish and Game. I'm the Southwest Region Fish Manager. Spent a lot of years studying the South Fork, and I'm co-chair on the Habitat Committee.
Stephen Pfeiffer. I'm with Idaho Rivers United. A lot of our members use and enjoy the South Fork, and I'm excited to get to know the area better myself.
Hey everyone, I'm Chase Cusack. I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality in the Boise Regional Office. I'm a water quality analyst, so representing Clean Water Act and Idaho water quality statutes. So also an angler and floater of the South Fork when I'm not working.
I'm Bruce Johnstone. I'm with Ted Trueblood chapter Trout Unlimited, and I've fished and floated the South Fork here for a few years off and on.
Timothy Wagner. I'm also with the Ted Trueblood chapter Trout Unlimited. I fish and hunt out there, and I'm co-lead with the Roads and Trails Committee.
Maureen Pepper, NRCS, Idaho. I'm here in Boise. I am the state water quality specialist.
Ryan Hedrick, I'm with Reclamation here at the Middle Snake Field office, doing the water operations.
Timothy D'Amico, I work for Fishing Game. I'm the regional fisheries biologist that oversees the South Fork Boise, and I'm also the co-chair of the user survey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dimitri Vittergar. Besides having a recreational interest in South Fork, I'm a fish biologist with the Bureau of Reclamation, and one of my responsibilities is making sure that Reclamation's operations align with the Endangered Species Act requirements for bull trout that use the South Fork watershed. Good afternoon. Vice Chairman Arnold Thomas. I'm just showing you Tribes of Duck Valley. Just wanted to come and see what in the world is going on. I know we have 18 village sites and throughout the whole territory here, so it's good to be here.
I'm Bob Susan. I'm on the board of directors of Boise Valley Fly Fishers Club.
I'm Troy Pierce. I'm also on the board of directors of the Boise Valley Fly Fishers, also their conservation director, and have fished the South Fork of Boise for over 30 years. We love to have a lot of members who fish the South Fork of Boise, so we're really excited and interested in what TU put together here. We're here to learn and see how BVFF can help.
I'm Craig Cordham with Congressman Mike Simpson's office. I also have not fished it that long, but fished it around the South Fork.
Rusty Faircloth with the Mountain Home ATV Club, past president for 18 years. I'm also on the board for the Idaho State ATV Association and currently in the Roads and Trails Committee.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Cleveland. I work for the Boise National Forest out of Idaho City, and I'm a recreation specialist.
I am Kristen Sauber. I also work for the Boise National Forest, the Mountain Home District, and I am also a recreation specialist.
Randy Davison, Prairie.
I'm Bill Rowell. I'm today. I'm past president of Trout Unlimited One chapter. Also have some experience with river planning. I was a recreational parks. Boise City and oversaw the
All right, that is everyone in the room. There is a sign-in sheet going around. If you already signed in at one of the previous meetings, I just need your name so I can remember who's here. Otherwise, if you're new, fill out all the information. Sorry for those of you who've already filled everything out. I am just going to call on folks online so that we have some sort of order to things and make sure we get everybody. So, Adrian?
Good afternoon. I'm Adrienne Holcomb. I am the Mountain Home Ranger District Ranger.
Nick Walrath.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Walrath. I'm the Green River Project Manager for Trout Unlimited in Green River, Wyoming.
You're Cusack.
Hi, sorry I couldn't make it there in person today. I have some conflicts going on and I might have to duck out early too. But I'm Kira Cusack with the Fish and Wildlife Service here in Boise, and I'm excited to be involved in this project and help do some bull trout work and conserve other species out there.
Katie Thule.
Hi there, my name is Katie Thule. I'm with the Seatskiddy National Wildlife Refuge. I'm the assistant manager here.
And I'm Colin Dawson. I'm a wildlife biologist here at Seatskiddy.
Mike Myers.
Mike Myers, Boise River Watermaster, Water District 63. You guys hear me?
I can. I think they're muted now.
Yeah, it's probably much better.
Yeah, we heard Mike Myers, so Nick Kunith.
Yeah, Nick Kunith with Idaho Rivers United. Kayak the Lower Canyon and South Fork, Boise a number of times, fished it as well, and yeah, happy to be here.
Daniel Hoke.
Yeah, Daniel Hoke, Water District 3.
Daniel was with Water District 63 for those who the volume didn't work on. Dennis Daw.
I'm Dennis Daw. I'm the Fish and Wildlife Program Director for the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation.
Brian Horsberg.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. This is Brian Horsborough. I'm the Deputy Area Manager and Middle Snake Field Office Manager for Bureau of Reclamation.
Lisa Foster.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Foster with Trout Unlimited out of Central Washington, tuning in to help out and learn about the low-tech BDA type projects y'all are interested in.
Is there anyone else online that we missed? All right. So, first thing we have on the agenda, so that some of these folks in Wyoming don't have to listen to the rest of our conversations if they don't want to, is their work on side channels in a very similar situation to what we have. They have Fontanelle Dam in Wyoming, and the CSPD Wildlife Refuge is right below Fontanelle Dam. They have similar issues where side channels have been disconnected over the years. They have low regulated flow over the winter and are a few steps ahead of us as far as modeling where side channels can go and actually implementing some of that stuff. So they are going to discuss a few things, and I am going to make sure that there's nothing else I need to talk about before that. Yeah, so Nick Walrath, do you want to share your screen or just talk? I'm not sure what you had planned.
Yeah, I'll share. I think I can share my screen for a little bit and then just field some questions, and then Katie and Colin can add. But the first thing I'm gonna share with you is kind of just a Google Earth of where we're talking. So here's Boise. Oh, first off, so I'm the Green River Project Manager in Green River, Wyoming. I've been here for going on 14 years, and this was a chapter project. The chapter of Trout Unlimited in this area is actually named after the refuge. It's the Seaskiddy chapter of Trout Unlimited. And before I go on, can you mute yours because it's super echoey in my head? Thank you. So that's that's kind of the connection there. But so here's Boise. I have been to Boise, and I don't travel out of Wyoming very often, but I do get out of. I have been to Boise before. But so just for reference, you know, this stretch of the Green River is similar. It's in between two large reservoirs, like the South Fork of the Boise. And then if we go across over to Wyoming, this is the area here, Green River, Fontanelle Reservoir. The Green River is flowing south. And then these are all the identified side channels that were part of the project. So, and maybe in a bit, Katie and Colin can talk about just the refuge and how it actually works with the reservoirs and was kind of in place because of the reservoirs. But one of the things on the refuge that was limiting was small fish habitat or spawning habitat for wild brown trout that are in the river itself, and a very popular fishery among anglers in the chapter and a lot of people that travel to this area to fish for. One of the, this is a little bit bigger system than the South Fork of the Boise. It's base flows run usually between 600 and 1,000 CFS. They tried on most good years, they try to keep it at or above 1,000 CFS. So that's just kind of keep that in mind as we go through this, this kind of presentation I've cobbled together on what we did and what we looked for. Another thing to keep in mind as I go through here, when we get down by this Highway 28, that's kind of the cutoff. The refuge does extend further down, but we, as a group, we really didn't want to spend money to look at side channels below that area just because of the icing issues there. Once we get down below there, it normally gets ice in the summer. It ices up, and we have large ice jams that push up sediment to cut off the side channels, or so some of this work probably wouldn't last very long down in that section of the river. So we concentrated on this kind of upper half of the refuge, where the red lines are here. And as we kind of go through, we had One Fish Engineering out of Fort Collins do this, and essentially what they looked at is the side channels, obviously, and then what they tried to recommend to us or put in kind of a ranking is how much material would have to be moved out of each side channel to flow at kind of that goal or that CFS that we're after. So we kind of shot for that 1,000 CFS, since that is the base, the base flow that the BOR and everybody kind of shoots for over the winter. And then they also looked at, how, the accessibility, the length of the side channel, and all that. And so what they used was LiDAR to this whole area has been surveyed via LiDAR, and essentially this is kind of what they came up with. They came up with each of the side channels, the length, how many days it would take. So I think they were saying it was take 1 day to move 200 cubic yards of material. So then they estimated how much material would have to be taken out of that side channel, and then they would come up with how many days, and then they went through and identified if it was what type of access was to the site, and then the average depth that would need to be moved out of that side channel. So if we move on through here, they also had a number of recommendations for structures in the river if we wanted to go down that road. And then let's see here. Wanted to get to, so each one of the side channels, kind of this is what they came up with. They came up with the evaluation. So this one, not recommended, 13 days of excavation time. And these graphs, I think, show it the best. And that's the black line up here is the center line of the side channel, and then this is the elevation of each of those the CFS in the river of where it would be flowing. So as you can see in this one, it would take a lot of excavation time and over the entire length of the side channel to get it flowing again. So those are the types of things that we came up with. And here's one with potential. It's just a couple feet of excavation. But I guess on top of that, you can unmute yourself. But is there any questions as far as this is just kind of this is what we have, and this is what the chapter paid for. They evaluated 31 side channels. Out of those, 9 of them were promising. 9 of them had potential, and then the rest were essentially eliminated or not recommended. So that's kind of what they came up with out of those 30. And then Katie and Colin and the refuge staff has been working on since 2019 when this came out, since then, to open these up with the Seaskiddy equipment and the equipment operators. So I realize that's a very different situation than this group is in as far as land ownership and then all the different players that you have obviously in that room. So I guess with that, Ryan, or if you guys want to turn yourself off mute, we can talk a little bit more about it.
So to start out with, I'll just bring this back to the Boise a little bit. So we have red LiDAR that was flown in 2018. I've asked multiple GIS folks to try to figure out what the date is on it so we can go back to what the flow was and get an idea of where we're missing, because the red LiDAR doesn't penetrate the water, so we'd only have the exposed ground LiDAR, but it is, I believe, at a 1 meter accuracy or resolution. There you go. So the red LiDAR is really good. We would probably have to go back out and do some on-the-ground surveys where that meets up with the main channel to be able to determine at what flow water can get into there, depending. If it was at 300 CFS when the LiDAR was flown, that's great. We don't have to go out and do as much on-the-ground surveying if this is something we even do. But
Anthony, that LiDAR, wasn't it shot before all the blowouts?
It's 2018, so it should have been after.
Okay, all right.
The LiDAR that Reclamation did was shot before all the blowouts, and that was the green LiDAR, so we might be able to use some of that for the in-water, but we probably mean going back in and doing either green LiDAR in select locations, if that's whatever the contractor comes up with or whoever does the thinking beyond my ability.
Okay.
Nick, did you have a general cost of how much that cost for you guys to get done?
Yeah, so in 2018 or whenever they, hold on, I can get that. So December of 2019, it was $9,500 is what One Fish charged us to go over all that data and present that.
And that's just the design report and not any of the construction stuff. So to you, in my understanding, correct me, Nick, to you did the reporting and the design work, and then separately the wildlife refuge is doing their own excavation work with their own crews that are already on site.
Yep. Yeah. So we're really lucky in this situation that the refuge has a traco and an operator and other equipment to actually do the work. We just prioritized it, and essentially they got a menu of all the side channels that were doable, and they had an idea of how much time they're going to need to set aside for those operators to just go out and do it. That was kind of what they were wanting from this analysis, was just, what are we getting ourselves into when we pick a side channel. So that's why it was kind of set up that way. Had So they can look at all the list and say, okay, let's go do C12 now, because that's the one that's next on the list. So yeah, I guess that was a long way to answer your question, but yes, they have their own crew and equipment.
Do you have any metrics to report back on at this early stage yet, your measurements? Tell us if you have water temperature, or number of fish, or plant material per square meter, or what are your metrics, and do you have any results?
That's a really good question. I'll let Katie or Colin take a stab at that.
Well, yeah, to date, we don't have any like hard numbers on it. Yeah, a lot of it is just anecdotal, what people are seeing out here. And we're kind of standing in for Tom Kerner. He's our project leader, who is about 2 weeks from retirement. So, but yeah, it's mostly just what everybody has been seeing, as far as success has been with them.
Metrics going to be? What are you aiming for? What are your measurements look like? What are the plant material per square feet, water temperature, number of fish?
Well, so I think the goal with these, I mean, it's kind of multifaceted from TU's perspective, and then also with our work with Game and Fish. They identified that one of the limiting factors on this stretch of the river was juvenile fish habitat. And so these side channels initially were, part of the project, and the goals were to create that juvenile fish habitat. In addition to that, the refuge, where we're between the two reservoirs, we don't see those high flows that cottonwoods and willows really need to be regenerating. So that's something we've seen with the refuge, is we don't have the younger classes of cottonwoods and willows and woody species coming in. So these side channels are also our way of addressing some of that too. So in addition to doing that excavation work, we're also doing like willow and cottonwood plantings there, where we've kind of restored the flows and widened out that green space and riparian vegetation. Anything to add to that, Colin?
Yeah, I would just say that we aren't actually going to do any intensive measurements on, like juvenile fish or aquatics. I mean, we can walk out into those side channels and it's abundantly clear from the second you step foot in them that, water's flowing and that it's working exactly as designed. But for us, the bigger picture was to deliver water to different parts of the refuge. As you guys may be familiar with, when you're stuck between two dams, your water table actually decreases. And that has happened in our area here. And so a lot of our narrow-leaf cottonwood trees, our big mature trees, are from the 1880s. So we are trying desperately to get water back into places on the refuge where we can get that water table to within easy access of the plantings, the stake plantings we're doing of both cottonwoods and willows. And so that is a big importance to us as well. So it's not simply just the fish aspect of it, but as I said, animally speaking, we can walk into these side channels. We can see tons of small fish. We can see tons of aquatic vegetation. We can see lots of waterfowl and shorebirds feeding in there. And then on the side of the bank, we have the willows coming back strong, and the cottonwoods being very successful too, because they're close to the water table.
And maybe this would be a good spot. I just have a few pictures to show as well.
let me just jump in for a minute here. So I was going to present this after. So the reason why
sorry.
on the Boise we're looking into this, we talked about it at the other meetings, but this is kind of a summary here. I share my screen again. So there was a Columbia River Basin wide study that was done that showed that on average, we've lost about 26% of the historic side channels that used to exist. On the South Fork, Boise in particular, that's even more severe because of the dam being constructed in I think it opened up in 50 or 51. So we have some research from U of I that's showing that we've lost about 62% of the historic active channel width. So we're losing this habitat complexity, the overwintering habitat, the juvenile habitat, the slow-moving water during flooding events. All of that is in the literature that we're adding side channels is doing a good thing for this, but it's the how are we getting there where we're bringing in the folks with the experience that they're a few steps ahead of us trying to get to that point. And Tim's presentation at our last meeting showed that we're getting this population bottleneck over winter, and one of the things that could be caused by is the lack of 62% of the side channel habitat that used to be there a long time ago.
I think it's important though, in full say it's low over winter. It's definitely the bottleneck of the population, we believe. I don't know that went out and did a lot of comparisons on, it's probably a whole lot higher than the Boise River. So, but anyway, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's gone around and compared it to overwinter survival rates elsewhere.
All right, that's all I had, just to touch on some of Tom's concerns that he was bringing up earlier. So yeah, if you have some stuff, Katie, to talk about, we can share your screen again now.
Well, and I guess I don't know how we're doing on time, and I honestly didn't throw together anything too official, just some photos I thought would be helpful. And then to touch on a little bit, just the process of, like Nick said, after we narrowed it down to, a handful that were maybe reasonable, how we have picked out which ones to do from there. And then I guess just to give you a little bit more context about Seed Skiddy and the refuge. So we were created back in like 1965. I think the dams went in around that same time frame. And as far as wildlife refuges go, we're kind of unique. We're supposed to provide not only for wildlife habitat to mitigate for the loss of the habitat from the dams, but we're also supposed to be providing for recreation opportunities as well. And so that's kind of where doing some of these projects to support game fish fits in with our mission as well. So let's see if I can pull up the right screen here. So can you see my screen? I'm assuming you can. But this is just on the left here, just an example of some of the sediment plugs that kind of end up in these side channels. And a lot of it is from like ice flows, kind of like Nick touched on. And then this is just a picture of, back when reclamation was heavily involved with the refuge, they helped put in a number of in-stream structures in the river. Some of these are rock sills and armoring. It was pretty heavy-handed stuff. And the goal was to create that in-stream fish habitat and to help maintain some of these side channels. So we do have some pretty major structures that we maintain in the river along and throughout the whole refuge. So these side channels are almost kind of smaller projects that complement some of the bigger structures that we have. But this is an example of kind of one of the earlier side channels that we did, it's actually below that Highway 28, and it might have been one of the ones that kind of helped us determine, that maybe the ice flows are a little bit too heavy down here. But as you can see where the Traco is, we were pretty lucky. We have some phenomenal equipment operators here at the refuge. But what they do is, or what they had been doing was they start at the bottom and they kind of dig out to grade. And a lot of times the operator can kind of tell when he hits that like cobble layer, that's about the depth that you want, and was where he was pulling out. And then of course he's very aware where he's putting the spoils, but he's kind of digging backwards up that channel or upstream up that channel, and then you pull the plug at the very head last. So it's pretty obvious distinction here between where the water is and what he's done, and then the silting in up above. And this is just kind of another view of that side channel. This was up at the head. The head of it remained pretty deep. It was just a plug down at the bottom, and then at the very head too. And so, yeah, we kind of partnered with Game and Fish on this, as well as Trout Unlimited. And then over here, I guess, this on the right-hand side. So this is kind of an example of those side channels that the report gave us, that pulled right into Google Earth. And then we went out, Colin, myself, and our equipment operators went out and to the sites and got a good idea of, how many days, how far we would be moving material, and that sort of thing, if there would be anything additional required at each of the sites. And then we've kind of just been working it into like our work plans. And if there's, while we've got the equipment staged up there, if there's other things that we're going to be doing is kind of how we've been approaching it so far. So I don't know, I guess, Colin, am I missing anything at the moment?
No, I would just say that the One Fish report, getting that was so crucial to have all these different options. Because you still need the eyes on the ground, even with that engineering report. It's really important that you have some people go out there, put eyes on each of the stretches, and figure out, are there going to be additional problems that may come up, or what are your opportunities for like planting or moving willows or doing all that stuff at one time. Because, if you've ever planted like narrow leaf cottonwood posts or anything like that, they got to go down 6 feet in some places. If you have big equipment there, it's real easy to get that stuff done all at once as a holistic project. So I wouldn't necessarily think of it, again, just as fish and aquatic habitat. You're going to do that how you picture that entire side channel to look. Because once you move that equipment and have it there, it's very easy to add in all the various plantings as well. And so having all those different channels identified, it was really nice to be able to pick the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and take the easiest ones that we felt we would get the most bang for our buck with, and go with those first and foremost. And, depending on your funding and availability, you may only pick that easy fruit all up and down your stretch of river. But then as more funding and more stuff comes available, then you'd be able to go to those more and more complex and more costly projects.
Yeah, so I think that's about all I had. I don't know if you guys had questions.
Yeah, I know that Wildlife Refuge are a little bit different in the ESA and NEPA world, but can you speak a little bit about the permitting and compliance process that you guys went through, or if there was a programmatic that was done beforehand?
Yeah, I can kind of touch on that. I'm not sure that it's going to be very relevant to you guys where your ownership is different, because all of ours it's an internal process that it's varies by region. So at the time, like Tom had he consulted with our Army Corps of Engineer rep, and then a lot of these were covered under either the nationwide permits or previous permits that we had gotten in the past, as far as permits from the Corps. And then, as within our program, like the archaeology requirement and that sort of thing, we had to clear it with our regional archaeologist and and I think some conversations with our local ES office as well.
I'll just add in there, and then with our local game and fish department, they would come out and survey the area prior to us doing any in-stream work, just to make sure that there weren't any active reds and stuff like that in the area at the time. But I'm not 100% on this, but I'm pretty sure that when you're sandwiched between two dams, as I believe you guys are as well, or two reservoirs, that there is a exclusion for doing in-stream work based scenario. I don't know what it is off the top of my head right now, but I believe that's what was used in our case as well.
Questions in the room?
I don't see any other questions here in the room. Thank you guys very much for your time. I have a copy of that report from the contractor that I can put up on our website so the folks can look through that and see what it looks like. And we will be able to go out and kind of see how this would integrate into our specific sites when we go do another field visit.
Okay, and we just want to throw out too, if anyone is interested in a site visit, we'd be more than happy to have you come out and take a look at any of these projects too.
Yeah, in May, I believe it is, Trout Unlimited has their Western Rendezvous in southeastern Idaho. I think it's still a drive between Idaho Falls and where you guys are, but that might be the closest that anybody's already going in that general direction. Is May still snow covered out there usually?
Nope, you should be good.
Should be good fishing.
Opportunity if anybody wanted to put those two things together. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how all this stuff was done. And thank you again for the time to put this stuff together. And I think it's great to see that our idea is already taking hold in another place, and we're not just starting from nothing. Yeah, and you guys are welcome to stay on and listen to the rest of our conversations. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data we have for the South Fork related to this, and then we're going to jump into some other topics. So,
as far as learning from others, there's been a recent side channel dug out at the upper Boise River here, below Lucky Peak Diamond Nature Center, and just in the last 2 years, having that water come through to that old cottonwood forest this spring when we're out there working, we're seeing all sorts of cottonwoods come up from the high water as the water came to through that side channel, as well as we're seeing a lot increase in trout. So, I mean, that's an in-town example of one that appears to be working as well.
Yeah. So the LiDAR that we have covers the whole river channel there on the South Fork of the Boise. It is, like I said, just this red LiDAR that was done in 2018. So that would be able to pick out some of these side things. This layer that's up right now on the screen is actually a valley bottom delineation that was done by a consortium of data stuff online that I was able to find. So you can see starting, the spillway campground is there on top of the dam on the right side of the screen there. And we're kind of seeing the whole roaded stretch down to Danskin with those boat launches, basically giving you guys an idea of where we are. So there's obviously some areas where the opportunity to add side channels is very limited because everything is very narrow to begin with, but you can see where there's kind of two bigger bulges by Cow Creek and upstream from Indian Rock. So we could concentrate on those two areas to get more, if we need a green LiDAR or on the ground surveys, if we were to pursue this heavier as a potential action in the future. But this is one of the bigger endeavors that we have come up with on the list, so I wanted to make sure that we had some background information to go with it as we continue to discuss the different options we have going on and which ones we move forward with. So, unless anybody has any other questions on side channel stuff, kind of did this in an odd order to get the presentation from the out-of-towners out of the way. But we can jump into committee updates.
Anthony, just a couple of things. One was up until last year, I served on a national racing stream committee for Trout Unlimited, looking at proposed projects around the country that we issue these grassroots grants projects, and the Green River one came across our committee back in 2018. I kind of filed it in my memory of looking at potentially applicable systems we have here in Boise. Pleased to see that they're making some advancement on that. So that's sort of the provenance of how we saw that today. Question for the group would be, LiDAR would be really interesting to have, and if it needs to be updated, that would be great. But I'm also curious if anybody knows of any historic aerial photos flying this area before the dams were built. There's photos dating back to the 1930s. Northern Idaho, maybe in the southern part of the state. Some others have photos where we might be able to interpret whether side channels present and the amount of vegetation cover, those kind of things.
Google Earth has a lot of that. You can actually scale back all the way through. The issue is your resolution in those early photos is really poor. So
yeah,
picking out side channels at 50,000 feet is a lot more difficult than the more recent aerial photos that are all full color and 1 meter resolution. So.
Yeah, I've seen those, but I've also seen aerial photos that are not like the equivalent from a satellite that Google Earth would have. They might be special angles.
Fluid.
How about with reclamation?
Andy Tramner from U of I has some source where he found photos from aerial photos of the whole reef from 1957.
Okay.
I am not sure, but that's where he did the comparison between 1957 and 2011. So I'm assuming that if he compared them, that he has access to the 1957 photos.
Okay, so we would have sort of just a post dam.
Yes, 7 years after the dam got put in.
There were some aerial photos that I saw 10 or 15 years ago that the Forest Service had. I don't know if they're still around. We looked at some of them and geo-referenced a couple when we were doing the bull trout telemetry work, and we returned those back to the Mountain Home District. I don't know whatever came of them, but we didn't have we didn't have the resources at that time to digitize all of them and georeference, but I know there were some that were around. I don't know where they are now.
We can take a look to see if we still have. What's the date range you guys are?
We can definitely do some research and see if we can find them. They may be with our heritage group.
Okay, I had worked with Casey on some other fisheries work, and I know he's moved on to different jobs, but he was the one who I had talked to about those before.
Yeah, and I just made myself a note to talk to Andy Tramner from U of I about where he got photos from 1957 and if those are publicly available for us or what we would have to do to get that. And there are reclamation grants out there for doing the design type of work specifically that are relatively new funding sources where I think with that one there's only a 25% cost share. So we could, and there's some grant funding from reclamation that would be similar, that there's no cost share at all for the next couple of years. So it may be something that we could get a similar type of reporting done where they can show these are doable, this is how many days of work it would take, and then as funding becomes available, or if we get a programmatic down the road for multiple projects to bundle together into NEPA and ESA consultations, we could put that stuff in there for if and when we can find funding to do it. But it is going to be a juggling of the amount of time we spend on different things and what the biggest bang for the buck is with all the different projects that we have ideas for. So just trying to get everybody up to speed on what the possibilities are and continue to have those discussions. So switching to committee updates, we're going to start with recreation. I think Stephen was going to give a little bit of a briefing on our committee meeting that we had back in December, and then I'll go through some of the stuff that we looked at in particular out in the field when we did that site visit on the 20th of December.
Yeah, I think I'll hop up front, so talking to folks. But yeah, for recreation, we're basically focused on boating, camping, bathrooms, and how improvements or modifications to those facilities align with that grant in terms of improving the water quality and quantity on the river. First we kind of touched on boat ramps and the official boat ramps in the area, how we might improve those with parking signage, that sort of thing. And then we kind of noted the potential to reduce conflict between trailer and campsite parking in the areas that those do overlap. And then in terms of regulations, if there'd been NEPA work done, which boat ramps, and if we could put those modifications under previous NEPA work or work with a categorical exclusion where necessary. And then beyond the official boat ramp discussion, we talked about user-made boat ramps and turning those into official boat ramps. We specifically looked at our road in Indian Rock, and again looking at that NEPA compliance and specific needs at each of those sites. And then two specific issues related to boating that we touched on was tailwaters ramp and the rapid near there, and a couple of options we have, whether it be putting a new put-in below the rapid or modifying that rapid itself, and kind of the drawbacks related to that, and NEPA process / permitting that would accompany that. And the third option being closing access and implementing signage in that area. But that was also touched on the fact that folks would just continue to make user-made boat ramps if you closed access to that particular place, and it might lead to more riparian damage in the end. And then the second specific thing we focused on was Calgary. Options there to upgrade for trailers and, again, address signage needs at that particular site. That was kind of the boat ramp discussion. And then in terms of bathrooms, the rules and regulations for installing pit toilets in terms of how close they can be to the water, and accessibility considerations, which might rule out installing pit toilets at some of the dispersed camping sites that are right on the river. There was discussion about porta potties as a temporary fix while we're dealing with permitting for pit toilets, and then also porta potties at those times where use is the highest in the corridor, and that could be informed by our user survey as kind of a near-term action. And then signage at dispersed sites pointing folks to the closest pit toilets was another specific idea that came up. Lastly, campsites. We went over Forest Service regulations in terms of what they have to have at the site to make it an official site. And then we discussed investigating the feasibility of adding official reservable sites to the existing options down there. Talked a little bit about Reclamation Village and the process that happened in the 90s, looking at making that area into official camping, what we can learn from that, move forward with that process potentially at Reclamation Village. And then also adding things like fire rings, tables, to some of those campsites without turning it into an official site, so making improvements without that official designation. And then the last thing was enforcement education related to camping, with a particular focus to that 14 of 28 stay pool in the corridor. But yeah, that's kind of short and sweet, and it's all on those notes, more or less. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so all the notes from the committee meetings are posted on the website. Daniel and I are working on getting that organized a little bit better so that they're easier to find instead of in kind of a sequential timing thing, and they'll just keep on getting lower and lower on the list. I'm going to check and make sure this chat has been addressed. So, oops. When we went out for the site visit, I'll start from the beginning. Page number and hit enter. So this is from the road going down to the dam, looking out at the upper stretch of river. There we go. So the tailwater launch would be off to the right a little bit of this image, and then there's a user-made launch right below that rapid that was created after the fires that happened in 2013, and then I'm not sure 14 or 15 when the blowout was. We have folks that are using a launch there to put in, and then there's a second one that you can see on the left side of this image where people are putting in there as well to get some fishing in this upper section of river without having to go through the rapid that might scare a few folks with hard boats and lots of expensive equipment. So one of the things we had talked about previously is this would be a launch site, not necessarily have to be where you could back your trailer in and out of the water. It's the upper end of the reach, so most, if not all, of the boats would be going in and not coming out of the water. So some sort of a ramp like this could be possible if that ends up being more feasible or cheaper than an actual ramp where you can back your trailer into the water itself. So there's two different sites that we investigated for potentially adding a new ramp to mitigate for the issues of the rapid and the user-made ramps. One of them is the lower user-made boat ramp area, or that's there on the left, and then one of them is pointed out here in the middle at another potential launch site. So we will look at those a little bit closer. This is Google image view of that upper potential site. There is an existing flat area across the road, but the road is quite high away from the river. When we were out there, it looked kind of like you could make some sort of a circular route for between the parking and the actual ramp. This would have to be some sort of a slide. It's too steep and too much elevation difference for there to be a back-in option here. And when we were out there, there's also a lot of erosion going on in that area. It didn't seem like the best location for that, and the island that you can see in the photo here, if you put your boat in, then you're going to have to, I think, I'm not a drip boater, but I think you're going to have to row as hard as you can to get to the other side of the river to go down and float that far side of the channel. So those of us who were out in the field thought that this location, we're delayed again a little bit. There we go. This location where the lower user-made boat ramp boat launch is might be suitable. So this is again Google image of this area instead of the image taken from the top of the hill. And similarly, we could have some sort of a circular route in there to make it easy for trailers, and some sort of a ramp to go down. And that potentially could be something you could back your trailer down, or it could just be a slide ramp like we saw in the picture there. It's a lot less elevation difference between the road and the river. And there's a little bit of slow water habitat, but the hard thing here would be if you're holding onto your boat while everybody goes and does shuttle, and figuring out a way for somebody to tie off and be able to walk on the bank to get your boat in that situation. But it did seem like it would be a feasible solution as far as meeting the Forest Service regs of requirements and everything else. I have no idea, but it is just when we were out there looking at things, it did seem like it, from just a pure physical feasibility, it seems like it's something that could happen and could help alleviate some of these areas where we're getting riparian damage and erosion into the river. There were other areas besides the boat ramp where active erosion was much more visible in December than what it was over the summer. So over the summer, most of the fishing is from boats. So these wading access points kind of had stabilized a little bit when I was out there over the summer taking photos and looking at things. But with the weather we got this fall and the active wade fishing, there were multiple locations like this where this is a trail going down right above Tailwater's boat ramp, and it's actively sloughing off into the river and being used heavily. So maybe putting some sort of stairs into a few of these locations might be good, and that, depending on the NEPA and ESA consultation side of things, might be something that we could do. But we have the motivation, the people, sooner than some of these bigger projects. This is Reckley's Village boat launch, and you can back your boat into the water, and then basically you're tying off to the riparian vegetation that's on the right side. I didn't get a great photo, but there's riparian veg that the bark is all smoothed off from people tying off to the trees instead of having any place to physically tie off, and the bank there is eroding as well from similar activities. So if we could figure out something to put in there to tie off to besides the trees, that might...
Like an anchor on your boat?
an anchor on your boat or like some sort of log, somewhat natural looking structure that you could tie off to instead of tying off to the riparian veg.
Or an anchor. That's what we get. You make them in lead with like a pyramid, you buy fancy ones. Fill a bag full of rocks.
There's some rocks out in the river, shallow rocks out in the river, just a few feet down there. You could park your
People
boat
use
on
those
if
to
you
pin their
wanted to.
boats so that then they complain about how
Sometimes if you don't want to.
Yeah, so on our site visit out there, there were, I think, 5 or 6 of us, and I think probably half of the folks that were out there did not realize that there is a bathroom at Cow Creek. So putting more signage out there, especially at the camping areas that don't have bathrooms, like Stephen was saying, having a sign, closest toilet 1.2 miles this way and 0.5 miles this way, so that we have some ability to direct people to where they should be using facilities instead of right next to their camper and then driving away. Anybody have anything else on recreation before we move to habitats?
Anthony? On the upper river issue accessing tailwaters, has it been discussed at all the potential of mitigating that rapid so it's runnable because there's a usable ramp, there's a usable restroom there? It's not a wild and scenic. It was actually discussed blasting when it first happened, and it just never got traction.
There are strong opinions on both sides, and that is an option that we have brought up, and we have a discussion coming up a little bit later with the eligibility designation, where it's eligible for wild and scenic, and what that means, because I don't really know. And then I think that there are some other rules that we have to look into where post-fire, I think we had 3 years to be able to do mitigation as far as Army Corps for that mudslide coming down. But after 3 years, I don't know if the Corps would even allow us to manipulate the channel because it's a navigation issue. So there's things we need to look into a little bit more, and the first side of things that we're looking into is what wild and scenic eligible designation means, and we'll learn a little bit about that later today.
I had a question too. Did you have any discussion about pack it in and pack it out signs or move that dumpsters at the locations?
We haven't added that to the list of things that the dumpsters we talked about a little bit. And I think what this group needs to focus on is things that are self-sustaining and having long-term funding, at least from the government funding side that I'm familiar with. There may be funding from individual organizations or members of the group, but if we put a dumpster out there, it's going to be a long-term funding to keep that getting emptied. And if this group doesn't keep on paying for it somehow, then we're going to have an issue down the road where it's going to fall back to the Forest Service or something like that, where could talk to the forest about adding that in and what it would take if there were some funding source that we could kick it off with. But the pack and impact out signs.
I can speak to the signs really quickly, and I think at our original meeting for the Education Outreach Signage Committee, we really talked about structure. We talked about, kind of order of operations, and if that would be a desire of stakeholders of this group, we could potentially explore signage like that at the discretion of committee's desires. So yeah, let's put it on the list, but don't want to get too far down the road. If that's of interest, we can obviously discuss it and talk about it.
Anybody else? So for the Habitat Committee, let's exit this.
Really quick, just National National Wild Turkey Federation. Keegan and them are very excited to both participate. They're an affiliate of the Wildlife Federation, and so I'm acting partially as liaison for them today. But I wanted to share that they're very excited and appreciate being offered to participate.
Yeah, so like all the other meeting notes, these are up on the website. The two biggest things that we talked about are two of the presentation type topics that we were talking about today: BDAs, beaver dam analogs, and the side channels. So with the goal of improving water quality and water quantity and helping the fish issues that Tim discussed with the potential for some overwintering habitat improvements, being able to make a dent in improving the populations there. So pretty much tributary direct habitat stuff, riparian vegetation, and BDAs, and then the main stem equivalent to the BDAs would be side channel stuff, and then also riparian veg. And then for the permitting stuff, especially for the BDAs, and just for getting an idea of where the prioritization would be, like at some point we were trying to get a float trip to give flow measurements in all the tributaries so we have a rough idea. And the permitting I'll talk about a little bit later this afternoon. For the BDAs from IDWR actually requires you go post irrigation season, so we'd have to pick locations we would want to try to get into October, November-ish to do flow measurements during that time for the permitting process for BDAs.
That applies even if there's no irrigation drawn from the waterway water source. Is that correct?
It is probably best for us to do everything because the water goes into Ararock and then Ararock water users.
I understand that, but let's say we're talking Granite Creek, right? There's no water drawn from Granite Creek for irrigation. So we do water measurements after irrigation season in that water path. That's typically when that creek would be running at its lowest flows.
Yeah, they want low flows so that Granite Creek, they would, in theory, if we followed all the rules and regs and didn't ask for special permits to go around some things, they would want that flow in the fall to be consistent with the rest of the flow measurements where there is active irrigation.
I understand.
And on the tributaries that don't have any irrigation on the tributary itself, they want that flow because if you put in 50 BDAs and temporarily back up water, there could be argument from Ararock water users that have storage water rights that you're now storing it in those BDAs or the groundwater instead of downstream. So like Daniel was saying, I got contacted by both backcountry hunters and anglers, as well as the Gem State chapter of the National Wild Turkey Federation. I, not knowing as many details about some of this stuff on the bird side, did not realize because of the habitat that the birds are using out there, whether it's sage grouse or turkeys or anything else, the improving the riparian with BDAs is actually part of the sage grouse initiative that is going on to try to keep them from being listed. So I didn't realize how much of a connection there was, and that's another group of folks that we can bring in. And like Daniel said, they're excited about trying to do stuff, and I didn't realize that a bird-centric community would be thinking about BDAs, but they are, so it could help us out with manpower and materials. And I think somebody that's on their board has access to a nursery, so we could get cheap nursery stock to do the riparian plantings to go along with some of the projects. Any other thoughts on habitats?
We did talk
about the mission statement, we need to work on that as a group and whatnot. And then the other thing that was sort of standing out to me from my notes was possibly upland habitat restoration too, and helping that contribute to the severity of some of the blowouts we see in some of the drainages and things like that. Like, I think that would be, and that's where Ann's expertise comes into. And it sounds like there's a lot of different tools, both riparian and BDA and probably some other things out there that we can use.
And thanks for bringing that up. One of the things that Randy actually brought up when we were out in the field is some of the areas where they've replanted heavily with not cheatgrass post-fire is seeing a lot less erosion than areas where it wasn't as heavily mitigated after the fires. So even some sort of, can't easily get rid of cheatgrass or else it would have been done already, but
there might be an opportunity to stabilize some of those upstream drainages. Yeah.
That's one I'd like to hear more about too. Stabilizing banks in places where we're getting sediment.
Yeah. I didn't even remember I had this in here, but I did talk to the contacts from Fish and Game that either Art or Tim had given me for BDAs. And there is actually a BDA project that happened on the upper Willow Creek, which is that drainage on the south side that goes in directly into Arrow Rock Reservoir. Relatively low gradient stream, and the Idaho Department of Lands worked with Fish and Game to put in 15 beaver dam analog structures up there in 2021. So that's a close site that we could go look at in the watershed already. But I was surprised to hear that there were things already going on up there. I knew that there were some little push-up dams that had been put in since the fire up there, but I didn't realize that there were also these put in. Roads and trails.
It's interesting, but our wildlife staff is probably utilized the BDAs, way more for a lot longer of a period than our fish staff. So.
Yeah, I think that was a sage grouse thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you shared it with everyone, but I had sent over the BDA checklist that we had built that got shared. So for our staff, we were lacking basically a checklist of all the things they have to do regarding BDAs as far as getting permits and timing and all of that. And we worked with IDWR staff and the Corps to develop that. So that has, thinking about timing and things like that. And there are, when you talked about stream measurements, they do allow you to use USGS stream stats if they exist for the area, but they did let us know that there are temperamental areas where they do want you to, like in the Wood River Valley, they do want to do, new current measurements, but all that information is in that. So it's based on, Clean Water Act and Idaho state laws, so it's just exclusive to NRCS staff.
And IDWR has a memo from 2019 explaining like how their permitting process will go. I finally touched base with one of the IDWR guys, and he's kind of saying that they don't have the funding for them to participate in groups like this, but they do have somebody on call during normal business hours. So when we get to a point of this is a project that we want to move forward with and we really want to explore the details, we can get folks together and contact them to get a better idea of what the water rights side of things are going to look like with putting BDAs into specific tributaries.
Our checklist is based off that 2019 guidance. So it incorporates all that, and it has all the local DEQ and the core staff, IDWR staff, anyone in that area to contact. So it covers all of that.
Yeah, I think you sent that out when I was sick in December. And
Oh, I'm sorry. I can.
No, that's
I
remember getting it now, but I did not. It just went over my head.
I'm sure. I can resend it if that's.
All right, roads and trails. You want to run through this, or?
I can do. Unfortunately, at the subcommittee meeting, the trails, the ATV portion, wasn't able to be present. So I'm going to apologize that the report is heavily geared toward the road side, and we still have a lot of work to do to figure out the use, the potential impacts, the areas of concern or areas of potential improvement on the trail and water interaction piece. But as far as the road piece goes, we were able to pull up very broad-based data for the area to give us kind of a rough idea of what kind of traffic volumes are out there, historic crash data for vehicles in the roaded section there, and then National Bridge Inventory, bridge condition reports for the bridges that are in the area as well. Pulled up a few. There was a 2010 draft study done by the Forest Service, Sissel, Black, and Nelson and Fly, that actually looked at the section of road from Pierce Creek Bridge that goes up the hill to the top. And there, it's a great exercise in science, because what they came up with was an incredible model for determining how much sediment's going to flow down into the adjacent watershed from the road based on grade, the amount of drainage structures, the size of the drainage structures, all these different things. Unfortunately, it didn't give you any answers on how to deal with it. And likewise, shortly after that, there in about 2016, they pulled the band back together and did it again on a larger scale, covering most of the Pacific Northwest. And again, they come back with the linkages between the unpaved forest roads and stream bed sediment. So if you can wade through those documents at all, some brief summary points. In the first one, Prairie Road was 75% connected to the adjacent stream channels, and 75% of the sediment generated on the road surface and in the ditch was delivered to that channel. So all the sediment that comes from the road, 75% of it's ending up in the river. The drainage points on that section of road, there's a lot of them. They go about 200 meters apart or 200 feet. I can't remember. One report's in metric and the other one's not. So I'm kind of conflating the two at this point. But 71% of those drainage points exceeded what they call a gully initiation threshold. So anyone who's been out there, if you drive up the hill and take a look, you'll see these corrugated pipes that are kind of dangling out into space, and a ton of erosion that happens all around it. And what's happening is, that we're focusing the water into a shotgun and sort of the placer mining approach, where as you go down the hill, we put it into a smaller and smaller tube, and it gets higher and higher pressure, and it shoots out like a rocket and creates these nice troughs that run all the way down into the river below. So at this point, we're trying to work with and trying to connect with the Mountain Home Highway District, the local Highway Technical Assistance Council, and the U.S. Forest Service's Engineering Department to come up with some best management practices on diverting and slowing down the water that's coming off the adjacent hillside and the road, and try to keep it from just turning into a rocket blast of sediment and bush that heads into the river.
Yeah, so we
Well, one other point. So that just covers that Prairie Road Hill piece. Then there's the whole rest of the road. And, we saw earlier some photographs of the erosion that you see on the riverside of the road happening. From an engineering perspective, it looks like a lot of this can be addressed through maintenance techniques. And that's where, again, we have to have an opportunity to talk with Mountain Home Highway District, Forest Service on their expectations and all this. But a lot of these issues you see in the pictures above can likely be addressed through a different approach to maintaining the road grade, the crown, proper cutouts on the non-stream side to take the water from running directly from the road right down into a channel and creating an eventual washout, instead sending it the other way and spreading it out. So there's sort of a two-phase approach to the whole roadway piece of the road and trail sediment issue. And one is the main piece of the road with these maintenance issues, and the second is the Prairie Road Hill that looks like a nightmare. So I think that's all I have.
Yeah, I've had multiple conversations with Mountain Home Highway District trying to get something scheduled for some of us to go down and talk to them in person. They had some family health issues and some snowstorms and stuff that have gotten in our way, but right now we have next Thursday at 11 scheduled to meet with Mountain Home Highway District, and I don't know if there's anybody, I don't think Brett Berry is on, but if there's anybody from the forest that might be able to join us, that would help us out, I think. But I don't want 20 people to show up and kind of overwhelm the highway district with our first meeting, but we do finally have something on the books, and as long as it's not a snowstorm where those folks are going to be out and about trying to clear the roads, then hopefully we can start getting a relationship with the highway district next week.
Could you ask if they have like any kind of car counter data or anything like that along there? That might be super interesting.
We have what they have.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, the traffic data is sourced from, well, it's ITD, but it's actually done at the district level on there. And it's also done as part of the National Bridge Inventory. They do counts across the bridges as well. So you get sort of an average annual daily traffic volume over each of the bridges. And everybody likes to say it's really heavy, it's really busy out there, it's gotten worse after COVID and all that, but the numbers, this isn't going to throw any highway engineer's flag for this is an issue we need to address. When you're talking 30 vehicles a day as an average, 90 a day in the peak season, and of those 90, probably 40 of them are the same cars, just making 2 trips. It gets hard to rationalize prioritizing funding to do something there as opposed to somewhere with 5 times, 10 times the hits.
Yeah, so some of the photos on the screen now are from our trip in December. This is the first hairpin turn as you're going up away from Pierce Creek and Danscan up towards Prairie. So it's really washed out. There's a wide channel of sediment that's moving down. This section actually goes into the main river itself and not into Pierce Creek first from this particular spot.
That's also the location where the most severe crash in the last 5 years happened in the corridor, was right there on that.
And there was recent work done on the power poles up here, whether it was Idaho Power or a contractor or whoever owns the power line, we have no idea yet. But it's just amazing how much, without any sort of vegetation cover or burlap or anything, any rainstorm just cuts into this stuff. So it's a lot of sediment that makes its way down, and it's fine sediment. It's not spawning size sediment that we want in the river. And then Willow Creek, There's the Danskin trail system off of that. The picture on the left here is over the summer, and you can see the substrate on the bottom. The picture on the right, see if I can zoom in a little bit. The whole bottom of the substrate is covered with fine sediment when we went there in the winter. So that removes all your interstitial spaces, it increases your velocities, and any fish that are trying to overwinter in there, it turns into a chute where they're constantly having to swim, and there's not really any place for them to rest. So filling in all those interstitial spaces with sand is not a good thing. That might be it. This guy. Highway District. And we will work as a committee to develop a mission statement for this committee in particular. And as some of you might have noticed, I put a draft mission statement on the back of the agenda for the whole group. So once we get that kind of developed, then we can work with the subcommittees and try to develop our own mission statements for each of those.
Anthony, if I may, when you were showing Willow Creek there, I just confirming, during the summertime, that is completely dry. There is nothing in there in the summertime. So that area, the only time it's got water is in the springtime.
Yeah, there is a population of fish in the Forest Service data that is up high where the water stays, and it must just dry out at some point. But yeah, it'll be interesting to like go up the trail system a little bit and see where there's permanent water, where there's fish, and
that's all single track up in that area. They take a motorcycle. So it's totally all single track.
Yeah.
Yeah, where your feet. Yeah.
Not recommended.
I've got a Yamaha GW200 that can go in there a little ways at least. I think that is it for roads and trails. We will work with Rusty to try to work on the prioritization between where there you get highest usage and where there might be some existing issues and where we have input from like the Habitat Committee or just the fish bios in general on where those things overlap with the high priority areas for fish. So we can work on that and hopefully get a subcommittee meeting scheduled that Rusty can make it to.
Yes. I apologize for the last one. I won't be there.
That's fine. It happens to everybody. All right. Irrigation and agriculture. So when we had the subcommittee meeting, there's no current needs that the local Randy and Lori could come up with for improving their systems. We wanted to get a little bit more of a handle on the ownership of the canal facilities and what's owned jointly and what's owned independently. But if there's not really any needed maintenance on those things or improvements, then we're kind of looking at how can other aspects help out the local farmers and ranchers out there. So looking at beaver dam analogs as a way to increase those summer base flows, reduce any flooding in the spring, if they get washouts and stuff, then the BDAs can slow down, hold that water up high a little bit, increase the water table, release it over the summer when everything else is dry. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. We talked a little bit about off-site watering and the maintenance that the landowners think goes along with that, maybe inhibiting some of the potential for keeping cattle out of the creeks themselves. There are some areas that already exist, like Lower Cow Creek, where cattle are fenced out of the riparian areas. And like we talked about earlier, Randy had brought up the idea that some invasive species management might not only help feed cattle, but stabilize the soils out there where native vegetation has a much more robust ability to hold the soil together than some of these invasives that are coming in. That is habitat, or irrigation and agriculture. User survey stuff. I thought that I had made notes for this and put them up, but I cannot find them. But yeah, we talked about wanting to get the committee to kind of put together a user survey in a couple different avenues. So one being kind of counting how many people are going out there in general with car counters, cameras for the boaters. We talked about Fish and Game doing some sort of a creel survey on their end to get to the actual fishing community itself, and then some sort of a emailed out and advertised in all sorts of locations user survey for people to fill in a typical online survey type thing where how often do you use the South Fork? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? All of that fun stuff. So we should get on that more than I have been, and that is my fault. But we'll need to get some of that stuff going so that we can answer some of the questions that we have, where as a group we have an idea of what people might want, but getting that opinion from the folks is going to be important as we go down. Do you have anything to add to that, Tim? Sorry about not having.
No, you're good. I just realized that it's stored on our Fishing Game Network site and not a Fishing Game.
No, we're not.
So I don't really have, but my notes are somewhere out in the ether. But yeah, most of that's pretty well, like Anthony's pretty much covered everything that we talked about. There are some examples of user surveys in kind of that have been executed in similar fashion in eastern Idaho. And just trying to figure out kind of what the ultimate goal of the user survey is, and then kind of working backwards from that. And that'll help define not only the population from which we sample, the questions that are including in the sampling, the sample methods, whether it's like Anthony said, right, it's a QR code at the boat ramp versus a email versus good old fashioned kicking down doors and sending out postcards or what have you. Car counter stuff is pretty straightforward. I talked about some of the highway district stuff, but being able to apply car counters in a more localized or tactical manner is pretty easy, all things considered, and then figuring out if, where we go from there with if it needs to become a real survey from an angling perspective or more just understanding who the users are of the South Fork.
Any other thoughts on user survey? Right. Daniel.
Yeah, I left all my super cool pictures and video are also locked. So no, I'm just kidding. I didn't make them. Wrap it up. We had a pretty robust conversation that tends to go the way that communications and outreach committees go, which is where we really teeter on the edge of driving from the rear. And so we decided to prioritize the mission statement. And we formulated a draft. I worked with Anthony and scripted it out, and committee members that were there, we're going to be sharing that with you first, but really outlined what I saw as the guardrails, that if everything that stays in here would essentially be our purview as this committee, and that included aggregating and organizing collaborative communications. And that means not micromanaging, but essentially utilizing the website whether it's an individual access or a members only page that can be a centralized hub where we can all find all of the information that we share in these meetings. We thought that would be useful. It's available now, but in a little bit of a disruptive personal opinion, apologies for whoever's crafting, but I think a little bit of a kind of a confusing, just a listicle. And we want to, secondly, coordinate public outreach and education that the collaborative is performing and or going to be. I use the word phases, I don't know why, but that first iteration of that would come with establishing the diverse values of the watershed that are held within this collaborative to the public. Secondly would be outreach and education on the projects that the committees choose to pursue. So there's kind of two steps into that. That's also reflected in the signage portion of this committee, which would be examining the needs for informational signage based on the existing rules, regulations, and existing priorities. So what's already going on down there that people just need more awareness of, and we would essentially bring that back to this group and the collaborative for approval, recognition, but we can do that on our own now before we really start turning and burning with any projects from the results of the collaborative. And then obviously second would be to curate and execute on signage and outreach opportunities based on what we choose to pursue. And that would come at the recommendation of the committees. So that's going to come to the committee members that were in our meeting first, that we can all discuss and review, but hopefully we can come to a consensus about that and kind of formalize that. Anthony and I discussed that our plan moving forward for this particular committee would be to have these quarterly meetings, to have an in-person meeting in the month following, so that we can basically have action items based on these big downloads that we get in here, and then we can operate remotely for everyone's convenience moving forward from that, because the board knows none of us need another meeting. Anthony and I have also been doing a little bit of back-end work on figuring out what we can do and what we already have access to before we carve down the road of being one of those communications or outreach groups that tries to make policy decisions for collaboratives, which is not our lane. But I want to recognize and that I'm grateful to the local, like 15 members of the local Trout Unlimited chapter here that is going to graciously allow us to utilize southforkboiseriver.org, the URL, correct? We'll be using that as the internal and public-facing sort of showcase of this collaborative, as well as we're going to be utilizing their digital channels for outreach tools. So big thanks for letting us work together with you guys on that. Great to have that in-house managed as compared to, being up to the whim of the general public finding us. And that's been in existence for a long time, and so really appreciate the ability to step into something that's already recognized. We also had a pretty in-depth meeting with regional Trout Unlimited staff. And again, this is not a Trout Unlimited collaborative, but there was an opportunity to speak with some of their staff about what in-house things like contractors and pre-existent sign makers and contractors for outreach, or what are their abilities to elevate, amplify our things that we want to perform outreach, or if we want to advertise the user survey or things like that, what already exists. And so I'll get our committee members first a list of that conversation and what resulted from that, but just wanted to let everybody know that we had that. And yeah, like I said, I think we'd love to follow up the month after these quarterly meetings where we can have sort of actionable items to work on heartily as a committee, and then work remotely throughout the quarter. I'll make sure to get all of our committee members the draft mission that I would love for everybody to workshop, but hopefully relatively close to on base. And I would say that pretty much covers this committee's activity over the last couple of months.
The only thing I would add is that I've been doing some work on the story map. So that had an issue with the state parks and rec roads access going away, and that caused some people to not be able to get into the website. It took me a while to figure out, but everything should be good now. You should be able to get in. The link is on the top of the watershed page in our website, and it's been in multiple emails going out. So I've added some maps to that includes some of the Beaver Dam analog modeling and some more pictures of pre and post fire. So we have that type of thing going on, as well as the website itself.
Would it be possible for you to send an email out to all of us with the links to the different websites or where information is stored, just kind of as a cliff notes? I'm going to go here and then sort through that. I think it would be handy for people just trying to sort through information.
100%. Sorry to jump in, but like I 100% agree. And I think our plan was that we kind of just figured out what assets we were going to have, and we'll organize them before distributing them so that we are So you
I
had
should have
to,
known you two would have been ahead of that.
So, like Daniel said, the website is the only way I know how to add anything is you just add it on the top, and the rest of the stuff gets pushed down. And I am not a tech whiz and do not understand how to make that different, but we are going to try to make it more organized so that if you're looking for something, you can get to it. And similarly with the story map, I have the GIS background and experience, and Daniel has the storytelling experience, so I'm going to rely on him a little bit to hopefully write up what this map means to us instead of me just putting out like, oh, this is the beaver model.
Geological sorting, the oldest stuff's on the bottom. Sounds like my garage.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and anything else on?
One action accomplishment, Anthony and Daniel responded to a request for that annual Boise Valley Expo, Fly Fishing Expo, our TU Club booth. This happens every year, folks. A few days before the event, you're always like, well, what are we going to have? We're going to display. We thought, well, let's put something together that we can talk to people about this initiative. We're able to turn around, put together a little handout, and Bruce isn't here right now, but him and others who manned the booth were able to a lot of conversations with people, let them know about this initiative. So that was one of the things that did get done. It's the meeting in October today.
sorry, taking the mic back, but really fast, I did want to share, because I think it's exemplary, and again, not to get too TU heavy, but it's low-hanging fruit with all the connections in-house. Anthony and I are going to do a roadshow tour of kind of sharing the fundamentals of the watershed with the Trout Unlimited chapters here locally in the Valley, and then in Ketchum here in a couple of weeks. And so we're going to be doing that. And if any members of this group would like to have similar experiences with groups that are either theirs or adjacent to their groups, I think that could be a really cool opportunity that we would be happy to do. And I'm sure there's somebody better than me for a lot of the specific segments here, but just knowing that we're kind of starting to get the word out. Make sure dates on that. I can't remember a long time.
March 13th is the Ted Trueblood one here in Boise, and April 3rd, I believe, is the one up in Ketchum.
Sounds great.
So next on our list is a different Nick, not the Nick that I thought was going to be presenting, but Idaho Rivers United is going to talk a little bit about the fact that the South Fork Boise is listed as eligible for wild and scenic, and what that means for our projects going forward. If we have to, what we have to think about as we're developing potential projects moving forward. Nick, I will let you share your screen and take it away.
Let's see here. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and do this. So well, excellent. Yeah, thanks for the intro. And yeah, you all get other Nick. Our executive director, Nick Nelson, is traveling to DC today. So I am happy to step in and share a little bit about what, as far as I understand, wild and scenic river management options. And there's some folks from the Forest Service here as well. So honestly, they probably have more insight and on the ground, I guess, confirmation of this, but we can definitely have a conversation afterwards or look forward to that. But just starting pretty high level as far as kind of what that means. And this is just a map which you all are quite familiar with, I am sure, of just the South Fork of the Boise. This is
We are still
management.
just seeing your slide, the non-presentation mode.
Oh, interesting. I've moved forward on my end. I guess let me know. 1 second. Let me turn off my video too, to see if that frees up some bandwidth. Can you all see that?
Yes. It's not in presentation mode though.
Let me see here. Let's see. You still are not seeing the slides at all?
We see the slides, but it's in the edit mode, not in presentation mode.
Huh. Yeah, for me, I'm full screen and moving through here.
Yeah, you might be sharing the wrong screen.
Well, let's see. Let me just remove my other screen and see if that simplifies things here. Let's see. Let me just try this again. Sorry, folks. Any luck now?
No, we're still seeing the edit mode. We can go with this if we need to.
Yeah, I'm very.
As long as it keeps on moving.
Does it advance?
Yeah, I can see your cursor.
Did it advance slides for you?
Yeah, we can see the slides advancing. So.
Shoot. I just wish it was bigger for you. Well, how about this? I'm just going to go off my notes. I will just not share. I'll just talk because it's not really important to see. There's not too much visual there anyways, but let me just get my camera back on and we'll just roll through this here. So what does wild and scenic mean, I guess, for management options on lower South Fork of the Boise? In general, let's get my computer back up here with my other slides. In general, the biggest thing, and I'm starting super broad, just assuming folks know nothing, but I know a lot of you all probably know more than that. But at the outset, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act established a national policy to preserve certain rivers that have these ORVs, or outstanding remarkable values. So preserve these rivers that have these values that kind of stack up regionally, that are unique and make them, truly, I suppose, worth protecting compared to other rivers within the basin or region of comparison. They also have to be free flowing and generally have pretty good water quality, with them. But the main things are that they're free flowing and that they have some of these ORVs that stack up regionally. And as the case of the South Fork Boise, some people like to, ask, how can it be free flowing if we're in between two, massive, dams and hydropower projects? They've really determined to try to keep these areas preserved in that fashion and, just prevent additional hydropower, essentially, or dams from being developed in these stretches that didn't already have impoundments within them. A good example of that would be, one that is formally designated would be, the Hells Canyon Reach, which is a designated wild and scenic river, which also is in between some hydropower projects. So that's kind of the basics of it. Where a lot of the protection and restrictions come from within the act itself comes from Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And with that, that's where we see a lot of the language that really has like kind of the meat of the conservation angle behind the act. And the most prominent within that is that FERC, the Federal Energy Power Commission, shall not grant any other dam licenses or powerhouse transmission lines. So it pulls that off the table for all designated stretches. But where it gets a little more complicated is there's also language in Section 7 that no department or agency of the United States, so BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, shall assist by loan, grant, or license in the construction of any water resource project that would have a direct and adverse effect on the values for which the river was established. Now, that's not to say that, any water resource project itself is off the table. It's those that have a direct and adverse impact. And, what a water resource project is honestly quite broad. I can share my slides, especially since folks aren't able to see them. Happy to share them with Anthony to distribute to the collaborative at large. But there's basically the Wild and Scenic River Coordinating Council, which is made up of kind of representatives from the Park Service, Fish and Game, Forest Service, BLM, all the agency staff that really are in charge with implementing wild and scenic river protections. They define water resource project as not limited to, dredging, fish habitat restoration, in-channel transmission towers, levees, pipelines, recreation facilities, really anything that impacts the water. But again, as long as they don't negatively impact those values for which the river was initially designated or where it is eligible. Now, Section 7 pertains for designated sections. So what that means for the South Fork of the Boise and other eligible or suitable sections is a little bit different. But, and again, folks from the Forest Service can probably chime in and add a lot more depth and clarity here. But essentially, as soon as a river is designated as eligible or has been evaluated to be eligible, the agency in charge of administering that river or overseeing those lands essentially switches into kind of protective management, where they're going to do whatever they can or need to do whatever they can within applicable laws and authority to make sure that this segment retains those values until a time in which it is no longer deemed suitable for inclusion or is designated. And that really stems from, okay, we do this inventory, we find these rivers that are eligible to be included, but that's going to take an act of Congress. So in the meantime, it's imperative that the managing agencies do whatever they can to ensure that they're not degraded or lose that eligibility in the interim and suddenly, are no longer on the table for inclusion in the national system. And that's reflected, pretty widely in the Forest Service handbook, in management directions. I have a slide in here that's taken directly from, the Boise National Forest Plan, and their management general standard for this area that oversees the South Fork of the Boise is manage the South Fork of the Boise River eligible river corridor to its assigned classification standards and preserve the outstanding remarkable values and free-flowing status until the river undergoes a suitability study, or the study finds it is no longer suitable for inclusion. So it really just it comes down to NEPA, right? As far as what is allowable, there's not a hard and fast rule of X, Y, and Z are things we can do, but anything that is going to happen, especially within the river corridor of an eligible or suitable section, it needs to be looked at from the lens of, is this, going to diminish or impact any of these values that, this river was found eligible for. And for the South Fork of the Boise, there's essentially 4 different ORVs, or these values that are split up between the different sections. There's scenic, recreation, geologic, and heritage. Surprisingly, fisheries is not one of them, even though that's one of the most common ORVs in Idaho rivers. And as all of in the room, that South Fork of the Boise is a wonderful fishery, but those are the 4. And for section 1, which is this recreational section that starts from the dam down to the dam skin takeout, is recreation, geologic, and heritage. And that section's about, let's see, I have my notes here. That first section is, let me just see here, 13 miles. Section 2, which goes from Menike Creek down to Trail Creek, which is the scenic section right in the middle, is ORVs are recreation and geology. And then the final wild section, we're down into that bottom canyon, is about 12.2 miles, and that's scenic, recreation, or geology. So those are the kind of the values that are looked at whenever a project is proposed or is going to interact with the river corridor. That's really the quick and dirty, and I wish I had a better answer, but it really comes down to it depends. And to talk about I heard it brought up earlier when we were talking about recreation of can the river itself be modified, even though this is not a designated wild and scenic river itself. To be honest, I think that's open to interpretation. I think it's more of a question of if it's a project that the Forest Service wants to undertake. It's kind of a slippery slope, to do in-channel modifications for recreation, and maybe that's going beyond the scope here. But it's kind of a gray area where there's not like a list of things you can and cannot do. It just has to be determined that will or will it not impact these values. And a lot of that also comes down to how a project is designed, right? There could be something that doesn't impact these values if it's done correctly, or a project that's proposed pretty poorly that would get thrown out because it just is going to have too much sedimentation or negative impacts on whatever value you may be looking at. So that's kind of the quick and dirty analysis that I have as far as wild and scenic rivers and the act, I suppose, as it pertains to the South Fork of the Boise. But be more than happy to, I guess, open that up to discussion. And again, I'd love to hear folks from the Forest Service, folks in the room, just kind of have that discussion moving forward, is what that means for this collaborative, how that may, I guess, guide your work and kind of what you're looking at.
Thank you for that summary. I guess if the forest has any input from their opinions, I'll let you guys go first. But
So I can kind of talk to that. I have a little guide that I keep on my desk at all times, as far as the wild and scenic rivers. And what Nick covered as far as the Section 7 is exactly where we have to go. We have to look at it through NEPA, through our regulatory agencies, as far as what would be impactful, what would be something that would be adverse effect on the values for which the river was established. So we have to take very close look at that, and sometimes we have to take these to a higher level to the regional office for their evaluation of what that really means for adverse effects. It may not be my call as the district ranger. It may have to go to a higher level. So a lot of times in these sections, we can still do small projects, do CEs, do things that are to the benefit of the watershed. We just have to take a little bit closer look at what those impacts are. But yeah, I always have this close at hand.
And Anthony had sent me a list of some of the projects that y'all were looking at, and BDAs and some of the other things. And there was nothing in there that, again, for me, I'm not the one implementing these. There was nothing that jumped out as like, this isn't something you could do. That river modification, that's the only one that feels a little iffy. But, habitat enhancement, all these things that are going to enhance or benefit these values are all game and things that should be happening in eligible or designated stretches where applicable.
Yeah, we just have to look at like short-term versus long-term in a lot of these ways. The short-term impacts from doing some sort of work, the sedimentation that would be happening while we're doing work or something like that is different than the long-term effects. So we have to evaluate it that way. And yeah, the in-stream work at that rapid would be the biggest red flag for me at this point in time with the projects currently being proposed or looked at.
What part of the in-stream work on that rapid is the part that throws the red flag?
Part of it would be fisheries, because that's an entirely different piece than just wild and scenic. But the wild and scenic portion would just have to be evaluated a little bit differently in the impacts to the, the why that section was designated, when it was designated. And it's just a matter of policy and protocol that we would have to follow, and it may just take more work. And again, it may not be the wild and scenic issue as much as a fisheries issue, and some of the other critical wildlife concerns that we may have to deal with.
Does it have to do with that was whether or not that would be considered, it was a natural landslide? You know, some people say, well, the fire and conditions that created that landslide, is that part of
it? It could be.
If I can, back in 2017, 2018, there was a drowning there down past the Ganston Float Bridge, and I was on the search and rescue at the time. We asked at that time for Forest Service to get involved because there was a log that was totally coming across. And back then, their answer was, it is a natural flowing river. We will not interject in how it flows.
But it's not a natural flowing river. We use discretion in the part of a free-flowing river, but then we don't use discretion when it comes to removing an obstacle. This is the part I can't wrap my head around.
I'm unsure. I'm just letting you know, we asked for it. They went to their higher headquarters and they said, we will not get involved with how it flows down to there.
So the other portion on the in-stream portion, for like a log that is impacting, whether it's in the stream or not, we don't do that portion. When inside the bank, outside of the bank, there's different regulations and policy that we have to follow. We've had issues in the past up around like the Pine and Featherville area with log jams or something like that, and where it's inside the high water marks, that's actually Idaho Department of Recreation that has to help manage some of those things. It's not just us.
unnavigable waters, I guess.
Anthony, I got a question. So it was established and said by at least two people that there are 4 values that each section of the river is evaluated against for determination of whether it's going to be wild and scenic. Is that, am I voicing that correctly?
I'll jump in. I mean, it's close. There's for the whole South Fork of the Boise, there's those four values, those 4 outstanding remarkable values, and whether or not it's I guess your question, what it's measured against, like it's already been measured. It meets the qualification to be a wild and scenic river, but to officially get that designation, it requires an act of Congress.
My question was, who determines whether it's scenic or whether a section of river is being evaluated because of heritage value or geological? Who is it that actually makes that determination?
Yeah, I can let Adrian jump in there, but in general, during forest plan revision, when the forest is, okay, we're looking at our forest, they take a pretty detailed view of all their rivers, they identify the ones that are free flowing, that's kind of the first criteria, right? And then they look at a region of comparison. So for us, it's usually, the Pacific Northwest, and they look at similar rivers, that aren't just in Idaho, that aren't just on the Boise. They look at kind of a regional scale and look at the values, the geology, the fisheries, whatever, all the qualities that a river has, and that kind of group decides, this rises to the bar that it's unique enough to have this ORV. It's not one person, it's not really a binary thing, it's a group kind of consensus that's regionally looking at these different rivers as far as I understand it.
Okay, and that forest plan is put out for public comment too, isn't it? So everybody gets in and has something to say on that final decision.
Yeah, and what I will say about anything that we do with NEPA, a lot of times we get both sides. We get, the people that absolutely dislike a project or they absolutely love a project. We don't get that middle ground a lot of the times when people putting in comments, and that goes for anything that we do. So when this portion was looked at as potential for wild and scenic, it was out for public comment. Anything that we do has to have that kind of public, evaluation and comment period. And if we don't get comments and if we don't get input, we don't know where the public stands on things. So if we're only getting, two sides, we have to try to balance that out along with the good of the landscape itself.
Just to add a little perspective on projects that have happened on the South Fork of the Boise since it's been eligible for wild and scenic for many years, really through the first plan that was adopted in 1990. We had a lot of projects that have gone through. What Nick has brought forward to us is that we need to be aware that under the Wild and Scenic River Act, because it's eligible, we need to review projects under Section 7, any sort of water resource project that have an effect through the screen or the criteria or the considerations of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. That's not to say that certain things are not allowed beyond the obvious of FERC licensed projects, diversions, additional dams in a free-flowing river. But the agencies work at an interagency level and share information on how to do Section 7 reviews to design projects so that they would comply with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. That includes putting barriers in streams that are tributary to a wild and scenic river to prevent non-native fish from exploiting, native fish areas that are higher up in the watershed. And there's Forest Service direction on, so were those not allowed? And they said, no, not that they're not allowed. It's how you design and implement the project. So there are ways to these things through the process. I think what we're hearing from Nick and from Adrian here is we have to be mindful that once we get a group established officially and we start looking at project work, that we're going to be having to comply with NEPA and the Endangered Species Act, but also the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Is it unsurmountable? No, it's not. And when they rebuilt the dam skin for road access, which was a pretty big impact when you look at the acreage that was involved, they did a wild and scenic review there. And in fact, what they said there was fixing and expanding dam skin local put in takeout area is a benefit to the outstanding and remarkable value of recreation for this stretch of the Wild and Scenic River, because it will allow for more use, but it will also address some erosion issues that are going on the river because the current site had some inadequacies. So a lot of this is stuff that can be worked out. Obviously, the agencies have a lot of say because it's what ends up in their analysis, and employees in the agency, what they can draw on as far as information about the project and how it's been considered and thought through. And Adrian also, I think, has an important message to us saying, well, we get opinions from all sides when we go through the NEPA process. I think it's incumbent on us as a watershed group that we hash those things out and figure things out on our own so that the amount of hearing it from all different sides is attenuated or improved upon by having, well, here's a broad set of interests who come up with some ideas or a proposal, and they've worked out some of those things for us. So we're actually kind of doing a little bit of work with the Forest Service to, address some of those. But I've been around long enough that I remember stories on both results of impediments in the river after the Foothills fire in 1992, where we had trees that went into the river on some landslides. The agency went in and took them out. And on some others, they said, no, we're not going to take those out. Because we think that those next spring will be enough to move it out. Then no one can forget the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, where in 2005, we had a major storm and it blocked the river from people being able to float the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And that's in the middle of the Frank Church Wilderness. It's a wild scenic river. Forest Service flew in helicopters and brought in the dynamite and blew up the logjam. So there are ways to make these things work. So I wouldn't get hung up about, yeah, there is this process and it could be an impediment, but it all takes design and good communication among all parties to come up with projects that people can support and that also comply with the letter of the laws of the spirit. That's the end of my speech.
I'll jump in and just say that was very well said. And often I think the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act gets the short end of the straw, or viewed as really restricting a lot of things. And we're the first one to admit it does add a layer, right? It adds complexity to the projects that are reviewed, but it is not as restrictive as I think a lot of people perceive it to be. It just needs to be, projects just need to keep those values in mind and present strong projects that are going to have minimal impacts when possible, really.
So the idea is that it's eligible, so we have to follow these things just because it's eligible. It's not that, hey, let's try to actually get it officially listed type thing.
That takes time.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that this is also a state protected river in the Idaho State Water Plan. That section is considered recreational, and the state has allowed some of those, like the boat ramps, to be built. It kind of follows the Wild and Scenic a little bit less. And also, it may have been right after 92, the fires in 92. There was a blowout on the stream just below Indian Rock that put a pretty gnarly rapid in there. There was a couple of years there, people were parking drift boats on a rock at the bottom. Over time, the high flows have moved things around again, and that's not the obstruction it was. And in addition to the tailwaters rapid right now, down the Lone Pine, where was it Granite Creek comes in there, or what's the creek comes in there? That blew out, and that changed Lone Pine up big time. That takes some pretty serious boat skills to get through there too. So patience, a couple of years of 6,000 CFS is going to move some things around. You look at staircase on South Fork of the Payout. When that blew out, Highway Department was up there moving the silt around. Idaho Rivers United got involved there and told them to leave the big rocks alone, but they moved the silt around, and that rapid changes every year. Slalom below blew out. It changes every year. So you never know what you're going to find when you get on these rivers in the spring. But those are unregulated. That's an unregulated river. What's that? That's unregulated. Which is that? South Fork Payout.
South Fork Payet's eligible as well.
Staircase and Deadwood's up there. It's a flow that doesn't get a small percentage of the total flow. But yeah, it is. You're right there. It's mostly free flowing.
Now we can get into the discussion at some point in the future on pros and cons of new boat ramp versus making existing boat ramp accessible. And I think that's way too much to try to cover today. Do you have extra stuff?
No, I guess echo the biggest thing now that I'm understanding what we're talking about a little bit more is exactly from my experience what Andy was saying is you don't want surprises during the NEPA comments, and if this collaborative effort that we're doing here right now keeps 10 to 10 where we're including all stakeholders, then I guess that's going to be the strength in our collaborative, I guess.
Yeah. Unless anybody has quick last minute comments on scenic, I'm going to jump into Beaver Dam analog discussion.
I'll just say one thing as it relates to comments with a collaborative. The collaborative strength that you guys have, if we have outliers not from the group, then what happens is a lot of times we can show that this collaborative group helped come up with the projects, help with the comments, all of those things. And if it goes to objection, and it goes through like an appeal process, the weight of your collaborative group is heavier than the individual. So I will just put it that way. If you guys are talking now, you're on mute.
So we all know that there were fires in the basin back in 2013 and the blowouts that caused some of these issues that we're currently talking about now have incised many of the channels, along with other anthropogenic influences over the years. This is a generic diagram of how beaver could actually bring your channel back to connection with the floodplain and store a little bit of water up there during the spring, slow down your flood flows so you're not scouring out as much. And then that water still comes downstream, but it just seeps out through the summer, and you can extend your amount of flow and the duration of flow in any of these creeks that dry out. Beaver dam analogs are a similar tool where you don't need the actual beaver in place to be able to do things like this. It is an iterative process where you don't just go out there once and put it in unless you do get beavers back in the system and they manage it long term for you. These types of things would impact multiple different groups, multiple committees that we have going on. I had reached out to a bunch of different folks that might be able to give us presentations, and what I found was the easiest thing for us to do might be to actually look at a couple really well done presentations that are available on the wonderful world of YouTube. I already had these open. So I am going to share from the other computer. And we are just going to watch this video instead of having a presentation from
Thanks a lot. Okay, I'm really excited to talk to you. The restoration project where we sell to partner with beavers in industry restoration. The one thing before we get started, I want to point out is we've seen some awesome thoughts already. Beaver-based restoration projects, and that's about the location back there. I think people are still maybe a little afraid to say beaver in our meetings, so it's really been pretty refreshing. But now let's just get started on this talk. So just to get you
All right. Adrian, you got your hand up. Do we have volume issues online?
Yeah, the audio is is really terrible online. I don't know if you're sharing with the right audio sequence or what the case may be.
Have his mic still not muted.
Yeah, the link is in the chat. Instead of me trying to figure out the easiest way around, this is the first one that is in the chat, and you might just be able to watch that. It kind of goes through the process and the fish impacts and temperature impacts and all that stuff. So it's I will try really quickly to.
Do you guys have the sound problems on your end?
No. We can
Go
hear
ahead
it
and
here in the
go ahead and
room.
listen to it then. I'll just listen to it later.
I don't think they'll hear anything if we mute the mic. All right, so that kind of summarizes some of the benefits of BDAs. The second one, if you guys want to watch that at some other time, it talks more about what our particular system might benefit from, is an increase in the actual bed of the stream height. So forming that, it's a pretty good video to watch too, but we don't have a ton of time left here. And it's just basically the only other thing on top of what this first presentation talked about is actually just raising the bed elevation by trapping sediment behind those structures. And some of the papers that I read when I looked at beaver dam analogs for a previous job that I had, you're looking at half of the storage of water or things upstream actually ends up being sediment. So we would be stopping that sediment from going downstream, getting into air rock, lowering the storage volume of air rock over the years. I think it's lost about 6% of its total volume due to sediment coming in from different areas. So we can show benefits in multiple different ways. And see if I can share my other computer again.
How about gradient? Is there a gradient above which they're ineffective? I mean,
so
most of these I've seen, and the videos I was looking at earlier were on relatively flat streams. I got to wondering just how steep they could go with them.
That brings us to this BRAT model, the Beaver Restoration something model. So this, if I can zoom in. There we go. So this is available on our story map for you guys to peruse. The green represents areas where it's the low-hanging fruit, the easiest bang for your buck. Blue would be the next level up for relatively quick returns. Yellow is going to be a long-term strategic thing because it's going to take probably multiple reiterations of BDAs to get that back up to the floodplain level where you're seeing the benefits. So we can use this and that channel valley width and some other things like where there are bull trout, where there aren't bull trout, where we know there are fish, where there aren't fish, to be able to prioritize this type of thing moving forward. But I think that helps get everybody on the same page with BDAs are good, adding beavers on top of them is better, and some of the fish summaries that came out of that presentation. Anybody?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, some of the steeper ones I've seen are like in the Asotin Creek, and if you guys Google Asotin Creek and BDAs and stuff, like, there's a lot of interesting things where it's also improved, like the rangeland quality. They've actually documented the stream flows lasting longer into the summer and things like that, which would probably be of interest to a lot of folks as well. So.
Yeah, the third video on that list that I linked in there, the end of it has, he talks about Bridge Creek again, but then the end of it has multiple different ones. And like in Idaho itself, Birch Creek, that I keep on confusing with Bridge Creek, the farmer that tried to put beavers in couldn't get beavers to stay on his property until they actually added BDAs. He's got like 150 beaver dams on his property now, and he has flow in front of his house for 2 months longer than he has in the last 50 years. So it's aiding the farmers as well as the habitat for wildlife and fish. But I think that gets us all on the same page and allows the different committees that are influenced by the potential for putting BDAs in to get a better idea. And like I said earlier, the Wild Turkey Federation and the sage grouse folks are on board with it as well because it provides habitat for the birds. So I got together a few different mission statements from other groups. And as you can see on the back of the agendas for folks that got it here, I thought that I had sent it out in the chat, but I didn't hit the return button, so it is not in the chat yet. So if anybody wants to volunteer while I'm finding this thing to give it to the folks online to just read through what I have there out loud will be awesome. Maybe?
Okay. Potential South Fork Boise mission statement. South Fork Boise River Watershed Group's mission is to provide a collaborative opportunity for the community who live, recreate, work, or are connected to the South Fork Boise River Watershed to inspire residents and visitors to appreciate and protect the watershed by building a shared understanding of current conditions and benefits of the watershed. With a focus on water quality and water quantity, identify and pursue actions that protect and conserve the watershed by rehabilitating ecological integrity while maintaining or improving beneficial and recreational uses.
So that is my thought, combining mission statements from different groups that I was looking at. You guys can take some time to digest and think about any edits that you would want to make to that, and get back with me on your opinions. I'll probably send it out in an email with the meeting notes and all of that fun stuff. But that's just what I have thrown together so far. Does anybody have any thoughts on that right now?
Like there should be also, I love it. It seems like there should also be something that's forward-looking, which is to protect and preserve the river for the future, which is kind of like the wild scenic act. Maine, it's going to keep new things from being like dams or other things. That's kind of protect and preserve. Not just make it beneficial for now, but protect and preserve.
I left a few minutes for open discussion on other topics that we haven't gone over today. If anybody has any new ideas that have come up, anything that you've seen on site.
Right. I'll say something on the BDAs. I got to looking around yesterday, and I watched about 3 different videos on them. And 2 of them were the Idaho Office of Species Concern or Special Concern or whatever the governor come up with on that one, are actually involved with a couple of them. One of them was on the Lemhi River, a creek near Lenore, that they were putting BDAs on. Fish and Game was involved in that. And they had changed that in just a few years they've been in there. The creek had gone from an intermittent stream to some years it was perennial. Just from, and they were having to go as far as 30 miles away to get willow cuttings to establish willows on them.
Yeah.
And then the Birch Creek one that was really interesting on what he'd done there.
I think I was surprised at how much of the area is actually doable with the gradients that we have, the steepness of the channels according to the Bratt model. But I think one area where you could potentially get the biggest bang for the buck, you got listed bull trout in Rattlesnake Creek. Little Rattlesnake Creek goes dry at the mouth in some years. If you can put stuff in higher up in that system, that gets potential connectivity for an area where we have a listed species going on. It doesn't directly connect to the fishermen that are fishing right below the dam, but that could be some place where having endangered species It opens you up to a lot more funding opportunities. It's relatively easy to access. It might be some place to start where we can get a foothold and get an idea of what's working.
Hey, Anthony, this is Kira.
Yeah.
I did just want to say we'd have to, I'd recommend to just be careful of where we do place them in Rattlesnake or anywhere there's spawning and rearing, just to ensure that we don't accidentally put in some sort of passage barrier.
Yeah, we would definitely have a lot of work to get into putting them into Rattlesnake and looking at what's going on in there and whether it might just be that there's so much cobble and gravel that the creek is going to go sub in the summer no matter what. But that's one potential location that is the low-hanging fruit on the list, and there's a lot of areas where BDAs have been put in bull trout or salmon and steelhead habitat where a lot of the steps that we would need to take in the endangered species area are documented and researched by others that we can use their information as we move forward.
Do you think Utah State would be able to assist us with some of that?
Yeah, so we could most likely get like some sort of a planning grant to do an analysis of where fish overlap with the easiest thing to do. And for the permitting side of things, IDWR, you would need to get a pretty good idea of where things are going to go. So we'd have to abstract out some sort of design on how many and where and all of that from probably Anna Branch that's out of Utah State.
There's a lot of workshops available too for that.
Yeah, there's a whole online like education thing with a big series of things. I started watching a few of them, but there's a lot of information out there, and there's even within the model, there's some areas where all the gray in the model is just there's some risk, and whether that is because there's a building there, whether it's close to a road, whether it's what that risk isn't really delineated out. So in some of those areas where we have the old Fish and Game reports from like Menike Creek, for example, that say there used to be beaver in there and there used to be more fish in there. If we look at what's causing that to be gray and not be something that they would suggest for a high priority area to work, we might be able to drill down into, is that because there's infrastructure at the bottom end that we could protect somehow, or is that some other reason that there's things going on in that system? All right, I will reach out, ask the forest again. Do you know of anybody road-wise, engineer-wise, that might be able to join us with the Mountain Highway District next week?
You can reach out to Brett and see if he has the person available. Okay. You're at first on the SO. All the engineering is. So, yeah, I'll talk to him. I can get back to you. When was Thursday?
Next Thursday at 11. The Highway District office.
That was the mountain one.
Yep. 1208 something street.
Oh, okay.
No, that's the state highway.
Is that a state one?
The county highway district is Canyon Creek Road, and then off to the west towards the power plant.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There's a gravel pit out there, and
yeah. So I'll work with the committee co-leads and try to get some committee meetings set up to kind of drill down from where we gave everyone the big picture to what are the next steps and decision points for us to make, and work with Tim, especially on getting the user survey stuff going, because that's fallen off my plate way too much, and that's should be something that rises towards the top as we get moving on the rest of this stuff. Well, thank you for your time today, and hopefully this was helpful to get together again and understand